for having me. I know for some of you that may have been to one of these in the past, you may have seen me in the past. Today, my goal is to continue to provide value and at least give you some insight of things to think about as you go through this process. Um, and it can be for a number of different things. Obviously, it's not just divorce. So, your overall financial literacy is ultimately the goal. I'm going to share my screen and share this. If you don't mind, just let me know that you can see what I'm sharing,
Sure.
and I'll kind of dive into what we got. All right. All right. Can you see that?
Yes. And we definitely, is it in a PDF or is it a
This is a PDF.
okay, okay, perfect. Good.
Yep. So, and with this PDF too, I have sent it over to your team. So if clients do have interest, they can actually have the PDF just to see a little bit more detail if they wanted to. Um,
Wonderful. Thank
so
you.
uh, I'll kind of start by giving a little bit more on my background and what led me to CLA, and then I'll dive into tax and wealth advisory and a little bit of that private client services that you mentioned at the end of that introduction. So first, for myself, I am. Born and raised in Minnesota, so every once in a while you hear that northern accent come out. But I moved down here to Georgia. I played baseball in college. Actually, it's how I know the firm William King, an attorney that several of you may or may not be working with, is a good friend of mine from our baseball playing days. We like to relive that every once in a while when we can. And I've known Sheila as well as others at the firm for some time. So definitely have a good relationship with the firm and had some great conversations. For myself, you mentioned about 14 years in the business. I started in 2010 right out of college and started learning the craft at that point in time and really learning more what it meant to be a wealth or a financial planner or an investment advisor for clients. In that time, I've held several roles. I've been a recruiter for the organization. I've uh, taught, coached, and helped develop wealth advisors in financial planning strategies and so on. I've had my own practice and really just work with my own clientele that I've built up over the years. And finally, in the last 2 years, I've decided to take that practice and transition it over to CLA or Clifton Larson Allen. The primary reason for that is one of the biggest questions we had as a wealth advisory firm or as a financial planner for clients was centered around taxes. And if we knew somebody or if we had a relationship with somebody that could help with certain tax complications or struggles or difficulties. And a lot of that happens during different life events, whether it's an inheritance of some sort that you may be getting. It could be a divorce, unfortunately, of those types of things happening, or a death in the family, or something else that has caused you to take over a trust or to help with some children or whatever the circumstances might be. So we really found that there's a lot of tax questions that surrounded those issues, a lot of wealth pieces that kind of tied to those taxes. So for me as a professional, it was time for me to find what's the next step, where I want to go, and how do I want to continue to grow to be a service to my clients. And lo and behold, CLA kind of came into the picture. They are a combination of accounting firms in Atlanta. So about 8 years ago, 9 years ago, CLA, a national organization, came to Atlanta looking to expand their territory, uh, purchased essentially a few accounting firms, combined them together, and created what we now have at CLA. 2 years ago, when they found me, that was their first step into wealth. CLA as a whole has been doing wealth for 35 plus years, so it's not new. We're a top 100 IRA, if anybody knows what that means. But at the end of the day, we are a significant resource to many throughout the country when it comes to wealth and tax planning. What we call it here at CLA is 12th, for lack of a better word. We created that. You do like that? Good. Some clients love it, and some people in turn like 12th was all we could come up with, but it is something that we started with. So tax and wealth advisory, one of the themes at CLA you'll hear us say all the time is that we're better together, right? So having that person separate and not in the same room having those same conversations can lead to some confusion or uncertainty or just overall complexities that don't need to happen if you have those people talking and working together. So for us, we've created Tax and Wealth, or 12. Um, Through that, we've it's done through our private client services team. So we have different departments throughout our organization. Some people, as you mentioned again in the intro, that help work with businesses that are selling. So if you have a business or own a business, and maybe it's appropriate for you to sell because of a divorce that's going on, and it could be a business that's had some success but can't figure out ways to split it up, so you decide to sell it. That is another department that we have that works through the due diligence of what is this really worth? Are you getting a good offer for that business or not? Then we have some that are more tax driven through very specific industries. Maybe you're a real estate professional, maybe you're a contractor building homes, maybe you're in manufacturing or some other department of what you ultimately do. And those pieces from a business owner have different tax benefits, tax cut, and different pieces that are important for the professional to understand. So we try to focus on specific industries to be a resource to the clients for those industries. And then the one that I'm responsible for in Atlanta is private client services. And that private client services takes the high net worth individual and their complex tax strategies, maybe because they own a business, and start planning not only for their business but ultimately their personal wealth and what to do there. It also works with clients that may not be that high net worth individual and might be focused more on the fundamentals. Hey, listen, I have a couple of kids. We want to make sure that we're getting them to college. Maybe you're like me. I have 4 daughters, so yeah, that's crazy every time I say it. Um, a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, trapped for the boy, and we got twin girls. So what are we going to do? They just turned 2 literally yesterday. Um,
Congratulations. That's
so you
great.
might be playing, right, and thank you. You might be planning for college or weddings, all the craziness that goes on in life. But at the end of the day, our private client services team is somebody that can kind of be there to guide you through those changes, and obviously, divorce being one of them. One of the first pieces that we make sure we discuss in Tax and Wealth is really tax efficient investing. Now, there's a lot of ways that I'll apply this to situations that you may be all going through today. But one of the comments that we make a lot during these conversations is that taxes can be one thing that drags your overall investment performance. Okay, so for example, some more efficient strategies may include looking at more of a long-term capital gain versus short-term capital gain. And short-term is really anything under 12 months is considered ordinary income. So if you're a high income earner or you're a part of a family that is on a higher income status, or if you're going from a situation where you file jointly together and moving forward you'll be filing separate, and maybe you're the breadwinner of the family, you may unintentionally put yourself in a different tax bracket. And if you have investments that generate an income to you in some way, shape, or form, making sure we're planning for the taxes that go along with those investments and how we, whether it's capital gains or dividend income or whatever it ultimately might be, we want to make sure we're using tax strategies that surround how can we make sure our investments aren't being dragged down by those taxes, by making sure, again, those investments are tax sound. And that could mean a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, it's making sure that we understand that taxes are going to be a part of that conversation. Some people don't prepare for this, but again, if we're talking about selling a business, when you sell that business, just like any other thing you would sell, you have what they call a cost basis. Cost basis, and essentially, is what was your cost to create or to start that business. Could be similar to owning a home. And again, I'm trying to apply different pieces of where this comes into play. Let's say you own a home together, going through a divorce. You decide that you both want to then leave that home. Nobody wants to necessarily take it with them. So you sell it. Depending on where you were when you bought it and circumstances that apply to that, many of us know that the real estate market has gone kind of crazy in Georgia over the last 5 years. So if you have a significant amount of growth in that home, how you receive that asset could be taxable. If you've gotten too much capital gains in that home, After I believe it's about $500,000, anything above that number of equity is actually taxable at a capital gains rate around 20-23%. So understanding how you own an asset, who owns that asset, and then how the taxes will be affected in selling that asset is extremely important. And there are ways to offset it. So whether we can look at places that we might have some losses, so maybe there's some investments you've made in the past that are considered a loss, we can take that to offset some of our gains. And that is really important, especially when it comes to a business sale. So working through the dynamics of what that looks like. If you go from a business, maybe you're looking to sell it for a couple of $1 million. There are strategies that reduce or give you some alternatives to the way you invest moving forward with those dollars. Qualified opportunity zones is an example of that, which I'm not going to get too much into the nitty gritty. But it's a tax benefit that was created during the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2016 or 2017. So it's something that is, again, available just to understand and learn about how do we invest and keep taxes in mind. Finally, as a part of this too is charitable giving. Some people are very much charitably inclined and have intents on giving to charity. How we do that from a tax perspective is extremely important. If you have high capital gains on individual stocks that you may own, I use Apple as an example, and you're used to giving $10,000 to $20,000 a year to a charity of your choice, it may be more efficient for you to give it through that stock versus writing a check. So things like that are another piece of the puzzle that we tend to make sure we help people understand, because if you gift that stock to the charity, they receive what they call a step up in basis, and they don't pay any taxes, and you get the full deduction. Say it's $10,000, $20,000 without having to pay taxes. So we kind of wipe away that tax piece that may have kind of hurt or limited the amount of money you could have given, or in some cases, reduce that savings account that you've worked so hard to grow. So tax efficient investing is an extremely important part of how we build a portfolio for a client. And for somebody that's going through the circumstances you all may be going through today, understanding those different hurdles and taxes is extremely important, especially through a lot of the changes that are going to happen in your situation when it comes to something as simple as your 1040 tax returns, and whether or not you're filing jointly or now single. So those circumstances can play a big role in overall investment and financial planning. One of the pieces our firm has grown us to some degree, a specialty in here in the Atlanta area is really using estate planning to create a more full picture for a financial plan. For a lot of people, this could be more appropriate for higher end net worth clients, and I'll get into some of those details in a minute. But for some, it could be very fundamental planning and things that you may not have thought about, and going through these bigger changes in your life may be appropriate. So it could start with something as simple as a will, and I know Cherish, this is probably something you talk a lot about. But a will basically stating, here's when something and happens to me, these are my intentions for my children, for my family, for my assets. It could be hard assets like a home, could be liquid assets like investment accounts, but really understanding the landscape of what goes on in an estate plan, and those wills and those other types of pieces are extremely important for financial planning and tax strategies. So we work through how to, number one, distribute your assets to the beneficiaries you may list. And a beneficiary could be a number of different people, and some people go through these different situations. So I'll give one example as a friend and people that we know, and a client that had some unfortunate things happen to their family, and they took over a trust that is being managed by an investment firm, for a child. That family now has to kind of help make sure that child's moving forward. And not a lot of estate planning was done beforehand. It was more of a shock that things happen. So the trust was established in the name of the child for the benefit of the child, and going through those, not necessarily loopholes, but really understanding the dynamics of what happens in those trusts that are created by the state is a big part of using and leveraging the attorneys you have internally. then understanding what can qualify as for the benefit of the child for different expenses that somebody might have, um, and continuing to build strategies around, okay, they want to go to college, or maybe they want to go to a private school, or you think it's appropriate for them to go to a private school, or maybe they just want to play on a travel baseball or softball team or basketball or whatever sport they may play. Is there access points as that caretaker that you can take that and really help that child with some of those funds that may have been received to a minor, underage child that doesn't really know what he can and can't do, or she can and can't do with those funds. Now, as a family member today here living and alive, we want to first teach you and educate you on how to protect those assets and distribute them properly to your beneficiaries. And a lot of times that's done through creating a trust. It could be, I'm not going to go through the acronyms of trust, there's several types, but really creating strategies around it. And if you are a higher net worth individual that has some significant wealth, one of the last things a lot of the families we talk to they want is, if something does happen to them, they don't want their children to have access when they turn 18 years old and have all the money in the world. A couple $100,000 to an 18-year-old child is a lot of money. Talk about a couple $1,000,000 to an 18-year-old child. That's a totally different beast. So we want to make sure we're creating very specific landmarks inside of a trust so that they have access to the funds when it's appropriate. Maybe they can have access to a certain portion of those funds when they go to college, or when they graduate from college, or to purchase a home, or to start a business. You can really create some guidelines or brackets around your wealth for your children as you move forward, to kind of help make sure they save themselves from themselves in that sense.
So it just a question on, so just because, as estate planning, we are like you at the Manili firm, where we want to have a holistic approach and a lifetime, relationship with our clients. So what do you recommend in terms of, if someone is going through a divorce, from a financial perspective, to, what are the things that they can first start thinking about?
Yeah, so I think it starts with understanding your wealth, knowing what you have. I know that that is a big conversation between families, and also knowing what is considered a marital asset versus not. So if you are married to somebody and they are receiving an inheritance of their own from a significant amount of wealth, or on the flip side, you are the one that has received that inheritance, and understanding what that means to you, and now your spouse that you've been married to that maybe was using some of those assets, what is yours versus what is a marital asset, is a huge piece to really dive into and understand. I think you have to first take that snapshot of where you are today financially, and then understand what are the pieces that we need to work on protecting, and what can we protect. And then again, we talked a little bit about this before. There's so many circumstances that come into planning for these types of pieces. Having the individual like yourself, Cherish, myself, and a tax person as a part of those conversations can be a very unique but also important benefit, because my team will be able to talk to you about taxes. And when you receive an asset from a breakup or a split up, when you receive an asset, what asset you receive is also important. Are you receiving an IRA, or what we call qualified account, as a part of the divorce? Are you receiving more cash or brokerage accounts as a part of the divorce? But then when we look inside of those brokerage accounts, is there stocks that are held inside of them? How long have those stocks been held for? Are they considered short-term or long-term capital gains? Do you need the funds? So as you can see, there's a lot of these questions that come up, and things that you guys will be asking. But on your end, and this is where we lean on the professionals in the estate planning side from a law perspective, we need to understand what is theirs, how it works, and what's appropriate for them. And then we take it into our sense and say, okay, from a tax planning or a cash planning or an estate perspective, here's what you receive. Here's how we can invest it to help it grow for you. Here's how we can help you distribute that wealth to make it more appropriate for you as you move forward.
And just from that perspective, it's also important to have, when you're consulting with us on your family law case, what that could potentially look like. Would you agree on that? Like just having everybody at the table and taking a very collaborative approach, because we don't know if we don't speak to each other, and we don't want to take a siloed approach. So definitely engaging with a financial advisor like yourself, so that all parties are talking to one another. Um, I've found that is good, a great approach.
I think it's necessary. I believe you miss I believe the person going through when you're going through these situations, being over prepared is a good thing, right? So if you don't have the wealth or you don't have the tax person involved in those conversations, it is highly likely that something will be missed, or you may not get the same advantages that the other person may be getting if they bring those people to the table. And again, it does come down to things. Here's a great example, and this is something we had happen with a client. Um, they had marital assets spread between them, both in individual brokerage accounts and in retirement accounts. Okay, they're in their 50s, so a little bit older than that, a little bit more money. Now, how do you split up those assets, and how does that ultimately get determined? The husband, in this particular case, had more assets in IRAs, and the spouse didn't have an IRA. So there was no equal asset, and the determination was, well, how much do they get of the brokerage account? How much do they get of the IRA? Well, breaking that down and understanding the dynamics of what each one of those are is really, really important. So some of the money in the IRA was actually in a Roth account, and some of it was in a traditional. So not having a person at the table to discuss, and some of this might be common knowledge for some folks, but for others it's not, where they might say, hey, yeah, I'll give you half of my traditional IRA. In the meantime, I'll keep my entire Roth IRA, or
Mhm.
maybe that's how they split it up. Well, the person keeping the Roth IRA has a significant advantage over the person getting the traditional. And those conversations, you again, you may or may not understand those differences, but having that financial person, that tax person in the room with you, more often than not, isn't going to hurt. If anything, it's going to help you strategize around what you're asking for, and even down to the brokerage account. Let's say it has Apple stock, Nvidia, which is a very popular one for those that are invested today, and some other pieces. Well, again, what stock you receive is going to have a different benefit. If I have Apple stock and it's worth $500,000 and I bought it at 100,000, that's a $400,000 capital gain. $500,000 is my overall amount that I'm receiving. Whereas if I have Nvidia and I bought it at $300,000 and it's worth $500,000, there's a $200,000 capital gain. So if you say, well, hey, we have a $500,000 Apple stock, we have 500,000 Nvidia, why don't you take the Nvidia? I'll take the Apple. Well, again, that's a disadvantage to the person receiving the Apple because they owe more money in taxes. So these are the pieces that, again, having that person in the room is only going to help you. It's not going to hurt you.
And so just a question following up with that. So what are your thoughts on when somebody should reach out to you?
Personally, before they go through a major change in their life, if it's something that they're thinking about or debating or planning, absolutely. Speak is today, tomorrow, yesterday, right? I mean, as soon as you can. I'm a firm believer that every person in America today, regardless of their level of wealth, needs somebody in their corner to help them with their financial picture. It doesn't have to be me, it just has to be somebody that they can go to, get advice from, ask questions that maybe they just don't fully understand. Even myself, even today, I have a financial planner that I work with and my wife work with to create these strategies, and I am one, right?
Right,
But
right.
we have them there to help create or that dynamic of different strategies, different ideas that maybe I haven't thought of that somebody with a different view can. So, yeah, I think if you don't have one, you're already behind the eight ball. So you need as soon as you can. Granted, the one question I do get is younger kids in their 20s. Okay, Sure, their situations are a little bit different, but even them need to at least know that the earlier they get started investing into a retirement plan like a 401k at work, the better it's going to be for them when they're in their 40s or 50s. So yeah, I think everybody needs somebody in their corner to help them with those things. And if you don't have one, today's the day. I'm here, I'm ready, right?
I agree, and leveraging the expertise of a family law lawyer when you're going through the divorce, and then also just really learning and educating and empowering yourself to make those financial decisions. So, another question that I may have for you is, so let's just say somebody doesn't know the financials. Sometimes we'll see families here who, it's the C-suite executive with a stay-at-home spouse or the
Mhm.
surgeon with a stay-at-home spouse. What are your tips, both tax and just in terms of, educating them and empowering them to make the right decisions during the divorce process? What would you recommend?
Well, and I'm going to go to the next slide, which talks a little bit about cash flow. So, regardless of whether or not you know your financial picture from a family perspective, where maybe you're not the breadwinner and you're the stay at home person and you need to kind of uncover what you might have, one of the first steps is attempting to gather statements. But you can get a pretty good handle on your financial picture, understanding your cash flow. So, how much money do you intake? Look at your bank accounts. There's got to be somewhere where you're spending money from. So, look at those bank accounts, see what money is coming in, understand a little bit more about what that dynamic might look like. So, really just gathering statements, gathering information just from your natural daily lives. What do you spend on a regular basis, right? What are you used to spending? What is a normal day in the life of? And Cherish, you might be able to tell me if, correct me if I'm wrong in this particular case, but I feel like if you're going through that process and you come to the table and say, this is what I need in order to continue to maintain my lifestyle, which is a total right of yours going through that process. One of the best ways to illustrate that is cash flow. Show this is what I've spent. This is what we spend. This is the dynamic of how our family lives. And that is, it can be done again through an actual analysis where we can sit down and punch in the numbers, but a lot of times we go to our clients to send us a couple of months worth of bank statements, and we'll go through and find out what you're spending. And based off those numbers, this is what you spend in this category, this category, this category, and that's what you have to be prepared for moving forward. So that's a good way to kind of discover without knowing all the details. It is a great way to discover some of those. But in that particular case, again, if you're that stay-at-home person, if you can't find statements, maybe they're sent electronically via email, whatever. I lean on your attorney to make sure that they're doing the due diligence to get that information from the other side. But again, if you're not necessarily knowing that you're doing the divorce yet, it's just something that has come through your mind of something you may want to consider. Getting that information through that partner of yours in the most efficient way possible is important because you do want to understand those different pieces. And gathering those statements gives us, the people that understand what they are, a real clear picture on that situation. So we can kind of, again, go through it and say, hey, listen, we want to go after some of these stocks that you may own individually. And it may be, again, you're right to have a portion of them. Here's the ones we want because they have a lower cost basis or whatever their circumstances might be. So let's ask for those. And maybe it's even something where we might take a little bit of less money, right? Looking through the statement, it might be worth a $500,000 account. We may take $200,000 of it, but we're going to take the $200,000 of stocks that don't have a taxable gain where the other 300,000 might. So we might net better. They might feel like they're getting more money and everybody wins, right? So there are circumstances of that. But again, it starts with statements, it starts with information. And the first place I'd tell somebody to go is just understanding their cash flow.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll talk a little bit more on this slide before I kind of get to these next pieces as well. And again, stop me with any questions that you have that come up. Um, so where we really begin, I know this is the third bullet point, so to speak, in the presentation, but where we begin our conversations with clients is centered around cash flow. A lot of people that come to meet with us have goals or ambitions. Maybe they want to start a business. Maybe they, again, are going through different circumstances that lead them to say, okay, well, now I'm on my own versus with somebody. I need to know and understand what I need to do in order to continue to maintain the lifestyle that I have today. And then once I do that, do I have enough funds to invest in other places to grow my wealth? We have a lot of families today that are kind of that middle to class person that is looking around with money sitting in the bank. Maybe they got 50 to 100 or 200 or $300,000 sitting in a money market account because they weren't sure what to do. And they want to start by investing in real estate. They want to start doing rental properties because they heard it's a great place by listening to the people on the social media sites and the radio, right? Well, again, we'll help work with that person to understand that process of making sure your cash flow is appropriate from an expense now, expenses in the future, creating strategies to kind of silo your money. What is growth money? What is retirement money? What is maybe some of these other important goals that an individual might have, like college and weddings and so on? We want to make sure we have those dollars siloed so that as you're building maybe one bucket of wealth, whether it's that business and maybe it doesn't work out, we don't want your other buckets of wealth to be affected. So really separating or siloing those cash flows, understanding what each piece needs in order to make sure that the businesses and the your life is thriving from a financial component. Those are all pieces that are a really big part of that cash flow and really understanding all those pieces. And really along with the other pieces that we mentioned earlier is how do we use that to help you go through the process you may be going through. Kind of the final bullet point in planning is risk management. And there are a lot of circumstances that I've seen in the past where somebody going through a divorce may be required to get a life insurance policy, or they may be required to get a disability or income protection of some sorts that if something happens to them physically, they're not able to do their job where they're paying alimony or paying some sort of child support, that they need to have these things set up. So one of the first things that we do, as you can see in the top left here, is set up those safety nets, and understanding when they need to be set up. Again, working with a good attorney, the team we have at the Manili Law Firm, the All Family Law, they do a phenomenal job of understanding these pieces because they do work and partner with people like myself and others that make sure these are a part of your conversations. But understanding what they might be could be long-term care, could be disability insurance needs, it could be life insurance needs, but setting up those safety nets so if the worst case scenario happens, your family, even though it may be separate and moved on, is going to be taken care of, and more specifically, your kids or even yourself. If that's something that you're in need of, we analyze those options. We're not a provider. We're not Mass Mutuals or New York Lifes or Guardians or Northwestern Mutuals. For those that's not who we are, but we have access to all of those companies through our partner Valmark Services, which is a broker. So they go out and they'll find the best options. We'll look through it with you and talk through what is appropriate and if it's something that you need to do. Through all these things is also establishing your succession plan. So make sure things are running smoothly. Let's say you're going again through a divorce, you have a child maybe that's looking at taking over the business, and your spouse and yourself don't want to do it anymore, but the child wants to take it over. Again, how do you manage that? What's a part of those conversations? Who receives it? How do they receive it? And what funds do you get in that succession? Is it something where the business is going to pay you for a certain period of time? Is it something else? I have clients that when they set up a business for the first time, it was set up under maybe that one spouse's name. The other spouse was never a part of it. So working through those conversations to understand what is your right, what you should have access to, and then as that business moves on in the future, what might it be worth? A great example of this is somebody might be willing to give up maybe a 401k or some other assets that they have outside of the business because they know the business is worth much more than the assets that they're giving you. Again, knowing those things, going through and establishing what that succession plan might look like, or even better yet, going through and understanding what your business is actually worth. You might have to pay some money to get a due diligence done on what the business's actual worth might be if you were to go to sell it at market in order to make sure you're getting your fair share. You might do that. That might be a part of the overall process. of your plan. So for us, we want to make sure sorry about that here. We want to make sure you're having those conversations, and that we can be, again, a resource to create these different plans around your business, and then again, managing different levels of risk throughout your lifetime. Um, so risk management is a glaring piece of financial planning as much as it is a glaring piece and an important part of going through that family planning as well.
Um, so I think we have a couple of questions in the chat. Um, so what are, some tips before and you're thinking about divorce that you would give to one of our clients? And then also, if we're doing, if they're in the middle of a divorce, what happens? And then also post. So afterwards, what would you recommend? And
Yeah, so the beginning, and again, if we're looking at a financial picture, there's a handful of things that are important, both in tax and wealth. So I'll tackle the tax piece first. Understanding the tax landscape, how you make money. Is it through investment income? Is it through the jobs that you have? Is it a W-2 type of a situation? And honestly, knowing the timing. So at the beginning of that process for an individual that is going through this, and really it's a difficult enough emotional decision, how can we take the emotion out of it and make more of a factual decision based off of the time in which you're going to do it? So a couple examples of this would be, the tax year you might be in. So if it's 2024, and do you wait now or do you do it later? And how does it affect you from a tax perspective? Some people may or may not know there's a lot of changes going on, potential changes in the sunsetting of the Cuts and Jobs Act happening at the end of 2025. 2026 is really when it would start. That has a dramatic effect on your overall wealth. Especially on the estate side, and Cherish, you probably can mention a few of these pieces, but the tax exemptions going from roughly $13.6 million, almost $14 million today, potentially back down to half of that, about $7 million. What that means to those that are over that level of wealth is that anything above that number is taxable to your heirs at 40%. That's a big deal. So when you're going through this process, and the first start, the very beginning piece is just understand your wealth, gather information around your wealth, both personally, marital, and beyond, so that you can really get a better picture of what to expect. And then from a timing perspective, know, like, okay, if I need to do this, if it needs to happen, doesn't matter if I wait. From a financial component, does that matter? Or is this something that needs to be done a little bit sooner rather than later from a benefit to me from that tax perspective? So that first part of it is important. The during, again, lean on the attorney you're working with. Make sure you're getting all of the information that is available. Again, imagine that once the divorce starts happening, we all know not every one of them is comfortable. Okay, there are some difficult challenges that go on during a divorce as far as the communication, what information is being shared versus not being shared. So really lean on the attorney to help get that information so that you can have everything available at your fingertips. Write down stuff that you've seen, statements that you've seen, and make sure that that information is being gathered so that you can successfully split in a more efficient manner. And then after all this has happened, and after these different pieces, meet with an advisor, work with a team, and meet with them regularly. You're going to have different goals. Your goals as a married couple shift as soon as things change to you being an individual, especially if there's kids, circumstances there. One person may be responsible for college funding and so on, others may not. So again, knowing what you're going through during that middle, that during phase is probably the most important from a tax and wealth perspective. But then afterwards, it's managing that wealth, managing your cash flow, managing those different pieces that are going to help continue to grow what you've started, so that as you do grow and you do get older and you do have different goals and ambitions, they can still be met. So I think there's definitely different stages there, and it is tough to really dictate those pieces. But the very first piece is just gathering information, getting as much facts as you possibly can, understanding your situation, helping to make sure you're getting the best circumstances for yourself, leveraging your attorney, leaning on that attorney to help get that info, and then just managing it as you move forward.
And just from a estate planning perspective as well, too, um, making sure that during the process that you have somebody who is different than your soon-to-be ex-spouse, um, that you are updating your, financial power of attorney, you are
Yeah.
updating your advanced health care directive, just to make sure that, if you don't want your soon-to-be ex-spouse, to be making those fundamental and critical decisions for you while during your divorce, updating those things. And
Well, and beneficiaries are another great example of
yeah,
that a lot of times are
I was
missed.
going to talk
Who's
about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just really, and so just, yeah, the beneficiaries. So what do you mean by that, Joseph? So tell me an example of a beneficiary where, you know, something went wrong.
Yeah. So a great example would be as you're going through a divorce. Let's say that you had a significant asset of your own, and we'll use a 401k as an example. So if you had a 401k, and let's say that 401k you worked hard for, and it's worth $800,000, $1 million, a significant amount of wealth to a lot of families. And going through your divorce, you did not change your beneficiary, and it was your spouse. Something happens to you, you pass away, whatever the circumstance might be. If that beneficiary on that account, investment account, is listed as your spouse, it's very rare, very difficult to get it to go to anybody else but them. It almost never happens. So who that beneficiary is extremely important. If you're planning on moving on and not doing, change it to your children, change it to your estate would be also a better position to change it to. But really, at least having that process done in those conversations so that you are labeling the proper person as your beneficiary so that those funds go to where you want them to go to. I've had actually a client receive it on the other side. You've heard stories; it's been on the news, stories, and on the social media sites, stories about people that, oh, well, I've been divorced for 15 years, and my ex spouse received my life insurance policy instead of my current spouse. Um, and then the process to try and get that fixed, it's almost impossible. So again, making sure those beneficiaries are changed to who you would prefer that person to be, or again, that estate to be, is a really big deal. I've had clients receive it when they weren't expecting it. And then, of course, ask the question and go through the process of, well, why would I give this to this person? When they may have been expecting it. So it's difficult.
Yeah, no, definitely. And just coordinating with us, like on your beneficiary statements after the divorce and making sure ticking and tying everything. But I think planning both from a financial perspective um, of the different stages is critical.
Yeah, and what's hard too is, again, we can't go on your, you know, 401k website and make the election for you, right? So it's for some people, again, that's a whole step in a process. And I'll give you a great example. Me and my wife, we are very busy people. Okay, she's in real estate, I'm in finance. We have 4 kids. If 2 of them play sports, they're older, and 2 of them are 2-year-olds, right? So if you were to try to tell me right now to go on my company website and change my 401k beneficiary, that'd be on like the ticker all the way at the bottom of list of importance, right? So walking you through that, or at least having somebody, a lot of times what I find that I do for clients is hold them accountable. Hey,
Mhm.
you said you wanted to do this. Have you done it yet? And just a constant reminder of here's what you have to do. If you need me to sit at the computer next to you, I can't click the button. It's your account. I don't know your passwords, right? Like, so being able to be there as that person that kind of holds you accountable, that accountability partner from the financial and tax perspective, again, I think is really important.
Yeah, and we're also from the family law estate planning perspective. Yes, that is on the checklist. That is making sure that they actually do it. and then we put it physically in the estate planning portfolio because we know the situations when it doesn't happen. And so we need, God forbid, if somebody passes away, if there was ever a question, we need the evidence, which is the printout that has been done.
Yeah,
So,
and one thing that just in talking through this that I'll mention too is opening up new investment accounts when you're working with this is also recommended. So what I mean by that is this. So let's say you're working with an advisor at Merrill Lynch or your spouse is working with an advisor at Merrill Lynch and that's where the large majority of the wealth is. I would not open that account at Merrill Lynch when you're splitting the assets. Some people like to do that just to ease of having the account. Well, oftentimes when that happens, that same advisor is managing the account. Instead, all those Charles Schwab, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, they all work in the same way. They're all custodians of wealth. So get a Charles Schwab account or get a different one and have your money transferred there. So you're removing their advisor from your financial picture. Um, Again, it just removes another piece of that equation, but it does help in things like beneficiaries. So if we become your advisor, we use Charles Schwab as an example. If we use Charles Schwab and you move funds into Charles Schwab with us as the advisor, well, then we can make sure the accounts have the beneficiaries labeled properly because that's part of setting up the accounts for you. So again, those are examples, but yeah, I think that's a good point.
well, thank you so much. Don't see any other questions in the chat, but I appreciate you taking time out of your busy professional and personal schedule to help us. We learned a lot, and I'm sure all of our clients will, be reaching out and if they have any questions. But thank you for today. Um, Next week, we will be welcoming Managing Attorney Jess Lill to our Client Care webinar series. She will be discussing mandatory child support calculations in Georgia to include deviations such as high income deviations. But Joseph, I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Absolutely. And if this does get sent out to everybody, this little hyperlink here will give you a place to send an email directly to my team. So
Great.
just as a bit of information, I appreciate the time and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you. Take care.